This is History Myths and Myth Conceptions. And today's myth is Oedipus Complex. Let me be clear. This video is not about psychoanalytic theory. We're not discussing whether this concept introduced by Sigmund Freud is actually valid. We're mostly discussing why the term Oedipus Complex is simply a bad choice of words. Freud probably could find a better, a more suitable name. The problem with terminology is actually quite hilarious. The complex is named after a mythological character, and this character, Oedipus, didn't have the Oedipus complex in all of the versions of the myth. That's kind of the point of the story, and of its stage adaptations, including the most famous, the default version, the tragedy Oedipus the King, or Oedipus Rex, written by Sophocles. It is not about sleeping with your mother and killing your father. It is about actively avoiding any of that. The tragedy of Oedipus is that he tried to escape fate, and you cannot escape fate. And this realization opens his eyes, after Oedipus blinds himself, at least in the most popular versions of the myth. Of course, the actual Freudian Oedipus complex is usually misunderstood as well. The phrase itself just became an expression which, depending on who's speaking, may mean something quite different. For example, sometimes people assume that Oedipus complex is when a man likes women who are significantly older than him. In that sense, yes, the eponymous king of Thebes can be labeled as a person with this complex. But Freud was talking about something very different, and later, psychoanalysts who were expanding the theory were talking about something different as well. Which actually leads us to a term Electra complex, coined by Carl Jung, which is essentially a counterpart of Oedipus complex, but for girls. The term is slightly more accurate because, yes, Electra actually plotted to kill her mother. But no, she didn't want to subconsciously or consciously compete for her father's attention. Her father, Agamemnon, was dead. Now back to Oedipus. Since the term Oedipus complex became surprisingly popular after 1910, when it was first introduced, it casts a shadow on the mythological character. People usually know the expression Oedipus complex, but have a very vague idea of who was this Oedipus, except that he slept with his mother, which makes him a terrible pervert. And once again, this isn't the main idea of the myth, and no, usually the mythological material paints Oedipus as a fairly decent man. And a version of Oedipus advanced by Sophocles, and this version influenced all later interpretations of Oedipus, well, his version is quite heroic. Oedipus is essentially doomed to pay for the sins of his father, for the hubris of his father, Laius. Laius and his wife try to escape the curse, the prophecy that their child will kill his father and will share bed with his mother. So they decide to expose Oedipus in the forest. But he survives, he gets adopted, and eventually learns about the curse from the oracle at Delphi. Oedipus doesn't know that he was adopted, so he assumes that the prophecy tells about his adoptive parents. So he decides never to come back home. And that's when he kills his father, more or less by accident, and then saves Thebes from the Sphinx, for which he is awarded the title of a king. In this version of Sophocles, when the truth comes out, Oedipus is so horrified that he not only blinds himself, he also banishes himself from the city in order to save it from the presence of the cursed, unclean man. Although it must be noted that there were versions where he didn't exile himself. Sophocles used the version which he thought served each particular tragedy better. Oedipus the King and Oedipus at Colonus were written many decades apart. Technically, one is not the sequel of the other, so they contradict each other in this story about the banishment. But regardless of that, even in Oedipus at Colonus, Oedipus is not only a noble character, but also practically a prophet, and his remains, his place of burial, is a sacred place. You cannot reconcile any of that with this idea of Freud to name a complex in honor of the character of Oedipus. The fact that we're discussing Oedipus and Sophocles right now is not a coincidence. I want to engage in shameless self-promotion and grab your attention for a couple of minutes. I'm releasing a game called Oedipus/Antigone. It is a visual novel adaptation of the Theban cycle of Sophocles, Oedipus the King, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone. It is a visual novel. A visual novel is a genre of games when you're basically reading an illustrated story. I always thought that ancient drama might be a very interesting choice of material for visual novels. So basically, you have the English translation by Richard Jebb, you have the original text in ancient Greek for reference, and you have illustrations. All of the characters in the game are represented as marble sculptures, usually quite damaged sculptures. The choice of this particular style was absolutely conscious, and one of the main ideas was to evoke a certain feeling. This is pretty much how objects of material culture from classical antiquity came down to us. This is how we frequently perceive classical antiquity. Obviously, I'm perfectly aware of the fact that the Theban plays of Sophocles are included in the curriculum in universities and high schools. So I want to provide a healthy alternative to just reading a book or to listening to an audiobook. And for people who already read Sophocles, it might be just a reasonably unconventional way of adapting the material and an interesting excuse to reread the tragedies. I obviously leave the link to the Steam page in the description. Depending on when you're watching this video, Oedipus/Antigone is either a few days from the release and you can add it to your wishlist, or it is already out there and you can download it for PC or for Mac and support this channel. Thank you for your time.